Okay, so we can't help you necessarily with your mental health. You know, we're not psychiatrists up here. We're not doctors. We're not your own personal therapist, which is completely different, right, than coming up here. But we do believe that mental health is something that is impacting, I don't know, everybody, right? It's impacting everybody these days. And it's a need that we feel like it's one of the things that SALT, as a smaller church, when we think of like, what is something we can do for our community? What is something that we can provide? What is something we can help with? And in some small way, we feel like providing clarity on a Sunday morning, an opportunity to think about what's going on with our own mental wellness and our own mental health, because we are a mind, body, soul, and mind. You know, we are all these pieces together. So that's the heart for Clarity. And so joining us this time, we have Linda Rankin. She is a pastor over at Eastlake Chula Vista, and I'm just going to let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about you, Miss Linda.
Okay. Well, hello, welcome. Good morning. It's an honor to be with you all. So, as Heather mentioned, I have a long career in ministry, but at a certain point in that path, I really kind of hit a wall. I'm sure like many of you. It is possible to be a workaholic and be unhealthy and be in full-time ministry. Who knew? And in the midst of that, I actually found that the church didn't have the answers I needed. It didn't have everything that I needed to be able to begin to heal from some of the things that I was experiencing and learning new ways, new rhythms of living. So this sent me on a search. And that search began with more practices that were around the practices of silence, stillness, solitude, things I deeply enjoy to this day. But those times that brought me to my inner life and journey, and soon for me to figure out that many people that I sat with also experienced, it also brought up our pain, right? Our trauma, our experiences that had happened. And so I needed more support as I went in. I wanted it to just be me and Jesus. Oh, how I wanted it to just be me and Jesus. And so many times that's our healing desire. But then we realize, oh, we need some other voices and some other knowledge that maybe we don't have. So that sent me looking for where's the monk who understands trauma and spiritual life. And so I entered into a 3-year neuroscience program that was all about trauma and the body and the nervous system. And that's some of what I'm going to get to share with you today. So it's a different approach to therapy, a little bit different than talk therapy. Sometimes we say talk therapy is top down, right? We're using our minds to figure out the fix for the problem, and we're exploring ways and practical steps that we can do that. Somatic experiencing, which is what I practice, is a bottom-up modality where we check it out in the body and let the body and the nervous system inform the mind. So just a little bit of a different process. So we're going to get into some of that science today because I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful for 2 reasons. One, it increases our compassion for each other as we realize what we're dealing with. And it also really points us to regulation through social connection, which is what a lot of you guys are doing by showing up and connecting in community. So that led me, long story short, to going back to school and pursuing my master's in psychology and practicing therapy. And yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, so you guys can see where we're going. We're going to be talking a lot about what happens in your body with trauma and stress. I want to go ahead and let you guys know that this could raise some questions as we're coming up, and we want you guys to be able to ask those questions. And I know in a situation like this, grabbing a microphone and standing up and asking a question is a little bit to ask. So we are going to have a slide that has a QR code. So what you can do is get your phone out, and go to the photo part of your phone, and if you go to there, it'll pull up a link. You click that link, that's where you ask a question. And Jason will be back there monitoring the questions, and I will have them access on my phone. So they can be fully anonymous, completely anonymous questions that you may have and want to ask as we go throughout this entire morning. We will have a full Q&A time. So I'll remind you guys of that. But that is up, and you guys can...
And the Wi-Fi here?
Oh, right. The Wi-Fi here is right there. It's probably the well, and the password is right there on the wall. Be my guest if you need Wi-Fi. I do know last time we did Clarity, if you weren't on the Wi-Fi, it was hard to get your question in. Good times, technology. Now you just want to grab a microphone and ask the question, don't you? Okay.
We're not getting a question.
Hey, Jay, they're not getting a question prompt.
Type in Clarity QA. ClarityQA.com.
ClarityQA.com. Forget the QR code, apparently. ClarityQA.com. ClarityQA.com. Is that on the slide? ClarityQA.com. Apparently that works. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, back to you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about trauma and stress as a whole. Talk to us about that. Like, some of us think we carry all of that in our brains. Like, I just carry memories. I have feelings. Talk about when you're talking about what does it mean when we carry it in our body? Like,
Yeah, so I think sometimes this has become more popular. Back when I first started studying it, no one was talking about the body connection. Not many were, unless they were in the field, right? It's become more popular. There's been books published. There's been a lot of pop psychology on social media that's exploring your body matters. I actually sit in a space where I engage with a lot of different therapists, and a lot of times they're like, it's super important to involve the body. But they actually don't know why. They don't know where we're going with that. They're just asking the questions of, like, what do you notice in your body, right? Which does drop us out of our mind for a minute and helps us pay attention. But I think it's important to remember that it's not like, oh, someplace in my physical body are all these things that occurred to me, and if I can just figure out where they're located and heal them, then I'll be fine. It's more about what we experience. The brain is such a complex organ that when we experience something that's really hard, it takes in so much beneath the conscious level, right? It takes in the smell. It takes in the sound that was happening. It takes in maybe just the presence of the people that were there. And so that can be positive or negative depending on what situation is occurring, right? And so that informs our body to prepare to survive whatever experience we're about to have. And so in doing so, it can sometimes get locked or stuck in that preparing part, leaving us with symptoms of anxiety or panic or things like that. Yeah. So do you want me to go on? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about this today, which part of me just loves to pause for a moment because it's that exactly what I'm talking about, that unconscious level, right? So even me just saying it now, some of you probably constricted, some of you are probably like, we're all good, like I feel fine. Some of you probably left the room even though your physical body's still here, right? So just noticing that and being okay with, like, hey, we're listening and we're learning, that's what we're doing here today, but also giving yourself the attention that you need, paying attention to your body, maybe some of you for the first time ever. So one of my favorite exercises to kind of help with that, if I am feeling like, oh, I feel something as she's explaining that, and it's stirring something in me, then go ahead and check out for a moment and try this exercise, which is, I call it Got to Settle, G-O-T, so that's the acronym we're using. So the G is for grounding, like maybe your feet on the floor, or feeling the strength of your spine when you sit up, right? Anything that kind of holds your body in a position where you feel more grounded. It's crazy that it took me so long to figure out that, like, the electrical ground is because the earth grounds the electric, right? Like, it grounds us, and so this is why so many times we talk about how important it is to just be out in nature, to feel that ground, to touch grass, right? So we're looking for ways to kind of feel into that, even though, like, I'm sitting above ground, obviously you are sitting with floor material over ground. And then orienting is a fancy word for just looking around. Pastor Nathan oriented us this morning to, this is where you go, this is how you find things, right? And that's really important to our brains because they're scanning for threat. They're looking for, are we safe, are we good? And so taking a moment to orient and letting yourself look around to something that you might enjoy. I noticed the color combination of those flowers on that board back there, and I think it's pretty. So I might focus on it for a minute, and that might actually send my brain the signal that we're okay. We're just hanging out, talking, learning, and I see some flowers. And then the T in the GOT is for self-touch or touch. Touch can be incredibly regulating and a great way to calm the system. So if you notice maybe you're in a busy meeting or something and it's more stressful, you might rub your thighs, right? Like while you're listening to something. You might actually like cross your arms. You might do something to kind of contain yourself in some way. And so that touch is really important and helps you ground and settle as well. So I just wanted to give that to you, offer it to you to say freedom. This feels like a church where there's lots of permission given, and so permission is given to take care of yourselves as we talk about this. If you need to get up, if you need to get a drink of water, if you need to get a snack that's outside, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, make sure you do that. Okay? I'm going to grab that and not hook to my microphone. So this is called a Hoberman spear. And it is my favorite toy to teach the nervous system. So we're going to talk about the nervous system. So bear with me. I'm going to take you back to high school biology for a moment, right? And this guy, his name was Hoberman, so it's just a model of a sphere. A lot of times you'll see it. If you have kids, you probably recognize it from like a science museum. Gift shop is usually where you'll find it, right? But it is a super helpful tool to use to explain the nervous system. So our nervous system has two branches, right? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic, is a lot of energy. It's our life force energy. It's the thing that gets us out of bed. Your body has a sympathetic nervous system, and it creates energy to say, hey, time to get up, time to get going, time to go do the things you want to do, right? It can be a lot of energy. It can be a really good and beautiful thing. It is kind of our life force. It's what drives us, is our sympathetic, right? But at its worst, all the way out here, it becomes panic and anxiety, right? And some of this, I like to say, when we're looking at it from more of like a self-care, soul care thing as well, it can be living life without margin. Right? Like we can sometimes like get stuck there and we just keep going. This is that workaholic tendency, right? The people who are sympathetic dominant in their lives, they more than likely cleaned every closet and cabinet when we experienced the lockdown. They were like, I do not know what to do with this, and they got super busy around the house. They baked 20 different banana bread recipes, right? So they could perfect the best one. So it is a beautiful thing. It is good energy, but at its worst, it's panic and anxiety. And then we have the parasympathetic, which we nickname rest and digest, right? So eventually, your body comes in and says, hey, we can't keep going at this pace. We have to kind of build new muscles, new neural pathways. We have to integrate what we learned today. And so we need you to rest, right? And so that's our rest and digest. And we go to sleep, and all those beautiful things happen beneath the surface. At its worst, it can be shutdown and depression, hard to get out of bed, hard to get to meetings on time, right? Because if you're more parasympathetic dominant, you're almost kind of in that freezy space, and it's hard to get going. So what tends to happen when we experience a lot of stress or trauma is we go from out here to down here, to out here to down here, right? And where we want to try and be is somewhere here in the middle. And it's not because life's going to be easy or stagnant or all of a sudden I'm on vacation, so when I get to vacation, I can be here. That actually doesn't tend to happen. If you notice, when you push hard and then you go on vacation, you get sick, right? Because it's like this part you kind of miss, and you just go from here to here to here to here. Or you start to come here in the midst of vacation, and then, if you're sympathetic dominant, the housekeeper or like whoever's cleaning your room or the front desk, or there's some sort of customer service, and you go here, right? And you're like, oh, I was doing fine, but all of a sudden now I'm out here. So it's beginning to learn this about ourselves, beginning to pay attention to what is the pattern that happens in me. We will we'll circle back, because the nervous system is such an important part of navigating kind of how we respond to life, how we interact with life and with people around us. How are we doing?
You're doing great.
Okay.
Great. A quick question, though. Can I ask
Yes.
you a question? When we're talking about this, do you think people tend to be one or the other?
I do think they tend to be more dominant in one way. So the people who are like, well, okay, I don't know how much you've taught on the Enneagram, if anybody's familiar with the Enneagram, like we'd probably put our 8s out here, right? And then we would put kind of maybe our 2s or 1, like they just shut down. Some people shut down and they're like, I can't handle this stress. A fascinating thing, there's a lot of addiction in my family of origin, and when I was in school and took the addictions class, I wasn't feeling triggered necessarily, but my body had the hardest time staying awake. I kept falling asleep in that class, and it was just a trauma response to say, this is too much for my system to talk about, so Linda's out. She's just gonna go to sleep, right? And so I finally had to go to the professor and say, I'm so sorry, this is what's going on, and I think it's connected to my family of origin. And he was like, I'm so glad you shared with me because I was starting to take it personal, right? And so there are reactions that we do. Sometimes I think of even like, the hopes that we have of like, I've been pushing so hard at work, I'm gonna really start implementing a day where I take it easy, where I pull back some, I'm gonna garden, I'm gonna do art, I'm gonna do all these things, and we get to our day off and we just binge watch Netflix on the couch and we can't move and we can't get off. That's this. So it's not our heart's desire. I think the important thing about this, which is why I try and create compassion around it, is it's the autonomic nervous system. It's a part of our system that's designed to help protect us and to keep us alive. And so it automatically happens, right? Thank God, like breath, we do so much breath work, and people love breath work, but can you imagine if we had to think about breathing? Like if we had to remember, oh, I'm supposed to breathe. It just automatically happens, which helps support our lives. So I think hear me and we'll keep going. This is not like oh yeah, I'm out here, so I'm just gonna do a few things that help me come here and I'll be good. This is a slow work that we have to learn, kind of first our awareness of the pattern, and then begin to identify what are the things that help me come here. Am I practicing them in my life? Do I have habits of bringing me back to here? And I think when it's a larger, even when we're talking social justice issues, when we're talking community things, like, right? I had the opportunity at one point to actually meet with the chief of police in the midst of some chaos that we all experienced as of late. And I taught her this because I said, if your officers show up and they're out here, what's that going to do to the people, right? And so I do firmly believe that we can learn more about this in order to help us show up with more compassion, with more kindness, with understanding. Some of that. I think maybe I might hop around here and tell you a story about my youngest before we skip back up, because that will help with this as well. And that compassion story. So I'm a mom of 3, and I became a single mom when my youngest was just 1 year of age, and I didn't remarry. So it's been a long journey of raising my kids in a solo space. And my youngest, we found our rhythms, and it was one day where I was really busy. I have work to juggle. I've got all this going on, right? And so my youngest, I really wanted him to just get his homework done before we were done with dinner so that we could just be done for the night and have an easy night. And so he's at the table, I'm cooking, we're multitasking, I'm redirecting, get that homework done. I'm beginning to start to get more stressed. I can feel it inside, like he's just having a hard time being able to settle down and get the work done. And I have learned this. I have been teaching it now, probably at this point. He's now 18. So he was probably about 7 or 8 at this point, and I had been teaching this for a couple of years. And so I had these balls in our home in multiple places. And all of a sudden, he gets up from the table and he just runs out of the room. And of course, that moment of sympathetic
Yes.
was like, hey, kid, where did you just go? What's happening here? Are you really not with me? Are you not listening to me? And all of a sudden, he comes running back into the room while I'm cooking, and he goes, I'm here. And the part of me that realized, like, you're not going to get any, like, that. What we know is when you're here, your prefrontal cortex shuts off. So that logical thinking brain goes away. And I can't problem solve and create steps to solve this when I'm out here. I've got to return back to here. So in that moment, I had to realize, like, oh, if I actually believe this, the best thing for me to do is just to turn off the stove, and we took a walk around the block. I want you to name something, I'll name something. I see a green tree, I see a blue sky. And then we'll come back in, we'll do that homework together, and then we'll figure out dinner, however that looks. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it's cereal instead, right? But that allowed that regulation to come back on board, and for me to understand, instead of keep fighting with you, it's pointless, because until you're out of this state, we're just gonna keep having this battle, right? And now I like to tease, like as he got older, I like to tease that he was fluent in nervous system, because we would go out to family functions or different places, and he'd say, "Did you see Grandma? When so-and-so did this, she was out here," right? And I think that's so helpful, because it helps us to be able to respond to people in society and to realize, like, this isn't necessarily something personal, but sometimes it can be that you're all the way out here. What can we do to help you come back here to the middle? And I don't say that to dismiss personal hurt, but I think it helps increase our awareness as well, to say, what are my patterns? What's happening in me when I do that? Helpful?
Yes, love that.
Okay. So as we talk about the difference between trauma and acute stress, one of the things I like to say, so I studied under someone named Dr. Peter Levine. There's a great book out there called Trauma in an Unspoken Voice. It's not a faith-based, but it does have spiritual chapters in there. But he talks a lot about this, about how trauma can come in sneaky ways and impact us. And so he says that trauma is held in the nervous system and not in the event, right? And he actually says it occurs with the lack of an empathetic witness, right? So trauma occurs with a lack of an empathetic witness. This is really important to remember as parents. I'm a new grandparent, so as grandparents, right? That we don't, it's not about the rupture, right? It's not about the event that happened. It's about the repair. It's about the presence that you are to that person as soon as the hard thing happened, right? And having that. We all have these experiences that impact our nervous system, and with these, we can become conditioned to respond to events in the present with more of a survival response instead of that grounded, neutral response. If you hear me say one thing, I want you to realize, like, this is not easy work, right? So I'm not just saying, hey, if you just come at it grounded, everybody's gonna be okay. This is why we pay lots of money to go to therapy, to learn those tools that help us be grounded, right? And so when that threat cycle doesn't complete, when we feel that threat cycle and it doesn't complete, then we become stuck. And the nervous system responds as if there's a threat happening right now, and it goes into overwhelm, that the overwhelm is still occurring. And this signaling is beyond our control. So someone experiencing trauma, when the event does not feel in the past, but continues to leave them feeling overwhelmed in the present. So if you recall something that happened and in this moment you feel just as much charge as you did back then, that's a sign that you're experiencing trauma, right? And so not all overwhelming events will feel this way. Sometimes we can look at things and we want to say, well, that's clearly trauma. And what this is teaching us is, hold on, that depends. How's the person experiencing, what their nervous system is doing in the midst of it. This is why we can have two people experience the same type of car accident and one person recover okay and another be stuck with PTSD symptoms for a long time. If their nervous system didn't get to complete, right, then they feel stuck in that space and they can have symptoms as a cause of that. So, yep, we're going to talk about that threat response cycle, but I want to pause for a moment to make sure you're good. I think we'll keep going before we go into the groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question about that before we go into the groups.
Sure.
Can I come back to that?
Sure, or do
Okay.
you want to ask it now?
Let's come back. I'll come back to it before we go into groups since we're
Okay.
doing groups.
Okay. So just a quick little aside with this threat response cycle, right? I like to describe it as a survival sequence that comes. We first have activation or startle. Like, what is that, right? What's happening right now? And then we decide on an action. Do we fight? Do we flee? Do we freeze? And then we return to a settling, or what we call homeostasis, right? So what is that? The response that we have, either bigger or shut down, and then a return to safety, right? So some examples of this are a deer in the meadow. If you've ever watched them, they will be grazing, and you're like, oh, it's so majestic, and I see it. And they pause when they hear a sound, and they look up, and they turn their neck, and they look around. They're like, what is that? And if they decide it's not actually a threat, it was just a sound, they'll go back to grazing on the grass, right? If they decide it is a threat, then they usually bolt. Fun fact is that all mammals flee first. They don't fight first. They flee first. And then if they can't flee, then they will attempt fighting. And then the order is, if they can't fight, then they will freeze. And that's kind of where we get that possum playing dead, right? There isn't much choice here. So that's a final defensive response to say, their predator may think, like, I don't want to eat it if it's dead, right? And then that's a way for them to actually recover and come back. And so this threat response cycle happens all day, every day. We are not talking about just trauma, right? Sometimes you're driving along on the freeway, you're not paying attention to your speed, you're lost in your thoughts, and you're like, I'm getting to my place, and all of a sudden I look in my rearview mirror and there's a police car behind me. I might have a huge wave of adrenaline through there. What is that? What have I been doing? What is going on currently? And then I respond by probably lowering my speed, trying to get over and let him go around me. And if he does just that and goes around me and I realize I'm not getting pulled over in this moment, I might take that deep breath and say, like, I'm good, right? So this happens all day, every day. But what we're talking about in trauma is where that kind of gets stuck. Another fun example would be someone who wants to go on a hike. Their friend cancels at the last moment. They have a deathly terrifying fear of snakes, and they're like, should I risk it? Should I go on this hike and I might encounter a snake? And they decide to go instead and go for it. And they're going along, and all of a sudden they see something in front of them on the path. And they are like, oh no, it's a snake, right? All that adrenaline. But this time, even though it's a stick as they get closer, they don't quite register that it's a stick. They might see it, they decide they have enough bravery to get around it and to keep moving, but then when they get home, they tell their partner, I almost died. The snake was 10 feet long, it was, right? And they're just like, I'm still here in the midst of this threat because they haven't quite come back to that regulation yet. And if you think about way back in the day, we lived in more community and tribes than we ever have. Like, that's a whole different topic, but even just how we have our, like how we lost our front yards to our backyards, right? And the ways that we have pulled ourselves away from living in community more. But in communities, you'd have the hunter-gatherers that would go out to get the food to care for the community. And if they got injured, the whole community came around them and supported them and helped them heal until they were able to get back up and do their job. And we kind of miss that as a society. So we don't have that space that helps us co-regulate to come back together. We create it. If we're brave enough, if we have the tools to do it, we say, hey, can you be that friend to me? Can you help me regulate when I feel dysregulated, right? Can I call you when I need you? And those can be really helpful things to do. So, yeah. You want to talk about your question?
Yes. Can I just ask a quick question
Yeah.
about what you just did? So the threat response cycle, so what you're saying, the ANS, tell me that again. It's
Autonomic nervous system. But the threat response cycle goes the activation or startle.
Mm-hmm.
What is that, right? A response to it. What do I need to do in this moment? Which all this happens so quick, right? And then either a return to safety or I'm still stuck in responding.
And a lot of the examples I talk about have been like physical safety. I'm thinking in my head while you're talking, like the emotional danger, like someone says something to me, like maybe I didn't see something, but someone said something yucky to me, or someone like, does that same,
Yes.
we get those same responses, even
Yes.
though we're not in any physical danger.
Yes. So for that example, you would talk about ruminating thoughts afterwards, right? If you're stuck on the, I can't believe, like, what do you think she meant by that? What happened there? That's not a completed threat response cycle. That's you hanging out in, I'm trying to figure out, do I fight you? Do I flee from you? Do you hate me? Right? All of those things, and you haven't returned back to safety. But have you ever had that, and then you meet the person, and they're like super warm and gracious to you, and you're like, I thought you were mad at me, but you're not. And then it's really up to, is it our ability to be able to feel that, to take that in? Like, can I pause for a second and feel like you actually aren't who I thought you were, or maybe they don't. And that, so I don't want to make the kind of regulation or coming back into homeostasis feel like it's always going to be the bow. It's not. Sometimes it's like, well, I saw that, it was real, and I fled from it. Like, right? I fled. And now I can actually relax because I can feel that person's not in my life anymore, and I can be safe, and I can return to that internal safety, right?
Yes. Okay. So we have, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of questions. I just looked down. Okay, so the first question is it normal to live in the sympathetic for years and then shut down and live the next 5 years in parasympathetic? So is it normal that for years and years and years, you were the type of person that went up here, and then over time you became someone who lived down here?
Yes, yeah. We can only do this for so long. I would even say, like, there's a huge Kaiser study out there for called, there's a book that they wrote on the Kaiser study when they started that Thrive campaign that's called Scared Sick. And so the idea is that when we get stuck in this sympathetic response, that this is where we develop a lot of our autoimmunes, our migraines, our fibromyalgia, our IBS. If you think about IBS, right? Like, the body has a pretty smart system to be able to say, let's lighten your load so you can flee on a dime. Like, and that's some of what's occurring there. And so we can only live here for so long, and then our body has to rebuild muscles, so it will shut you down in order to be able to do that. And it's careful, I'm careful in this is just a nuance of the science myself. It may not make sense to you. Parasympathetic is the beauty of the rest and the repair. Freeze is kind of like the high tone of that. It's not as helpful. It still will happen. Another way that I'll say it sometimes is the brake and the gas. So ideally, in our systems, we should be two-footed drivers, right? So we go and we do our work and all of that, and then we begin to transition and bring that brake in and cool down for the night and rest and go to sleep. And there should be this nice kind of symbiotic relationship between the two, going back and forth. But what can happen is that we don't let off, and the brake is over here saying, hey, I have some work to do. You need to sleep so that I can take care of these processes. And we're like, nope, not letting go of that thought, not letting go of that anxiety. We will die if we let go of it. And so eventually the brake goes, okay, well, I'm just going to come in on top because I have to do that work. And now what you see is the freeze. It's almost the blanket that goes over the activation. So sometimes we like to think of it as like, oh, it's a disconnect, which it can be, and it can even feel good, right? Freeze is a form of analgesic, kind of gives a numbing effect. But what we realize and why therapy can be so hard is when we show up and start to talk about things and start to pull off that brake, all that anxiety and all that activation, all that sympathetic is underneath it. And so we have to slowly begin to do that so that it can begin to work like this again.
How do you know when your body is experiencing something that's abnormal that you need help with, or at least something that you should address?
Mm-hmm.
So this question sounds like a little bit like, how would you, like, maybe we don't
Yeah.
trust our bodies, maybe? Or, like...
Yeah. Which is a big thing, right? Especially in the church world, if I can speak to that.
Yes, please do.
Like, we're kind of taught not to trust our bodies. That's part of our Western culture, but also in church as well, because it can be attached to so much of like, oh, well, it's my body that sends and it's my mind that wants to stay, pure or what have you. And so that has created a distrust, and we can become like heads walking around on sticks, right? So as we check into our bodies, they're going to express more because they have a lot to say. And so I think recognizing it's slow work, I would always say, like, I would be the Oprah that says everybody gets a therapist. If it wasn't so expensive, I would say if you have any kind of inclination that, like, maybe I need some help or support with this, I would 100% say go get it. Yeah.
Okay, so the next kind of questions, actually, there's 3. They kind of magically build on each other, so I'm just going to let them build. Okay, so how can we work to minimize the triggers that activate our fight, flight, or freeze response?
So some of that is trusting the cues. Like, we miss the what's that. We go, I heard a sound, I felt threatened, I'm out of here. We don't actually pause to slow down to say, like, is this actually a threat? Can I feel it? Where do I feel it in my body? Is there any information with it? Sometimes when I'm doing this work with clients, they check into their body and realize, like, oh, as I sit with it for a moment, I know what it's connected to, right? Sometimes it just takes someone asking us, whose voice is that? Is that actually your voice? Is that actually what's happening? And so we begin to explore what are the messages of our body. Sometimes I like to say, like, you can be at war with your body and not even realize that you were. So it's beginning to figure out, how do I befriend it? How do we begin to have a partnership that works together instead of shaming it, right? Your body is not the enemy in this case.
I think my own therapist, one thing she taught me was, like, before I went into something, she was just like, just pause and feel what you're feeling. Doesn't mean we're not going to go into, because I go into the shrinking, whatever that one. Like, doesn't mean you're not, you can't. It doesn't mean you can't binge Netflix all day long today. Just let's pay attention to what you're feeling before you do that. So the imagery of the deer, almost like the deer doesn't always immediately just jump. The deer looks up, takes a beat, checks out what's around.
And that's the most important part that we miss so often. And some of that is because we're just not slowing down.
I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't have time to feel. A practical example from that, I'll date myself, but part of why I hit my wall in ministry was some of the habits that I had, right? Like, this is going to date myself because some of you may remember the days of the BlackBerry. We thought we were so cool carrying our big old BlackBerries on our belt like we were emergency room doctors. Right? And so I might go into a hospital and do a really tough visit with someone, and then as I'm walking to the elevator, my BlackBerry is out and I'm already, like, on to the next thing and emailing, right? That gives your body zero time, zero respect to say, like, wow, that was hard. Like, what do I need in this moment? And even if I can't fully feel how hard that was, can I take a moment to just not rush myself to the next thing?
Next question. Sometimes when I get really stressed, someone from our audience, I find that I want to over-explain myself to someone to walk through a thought process and complete the loop. If at our most anxious, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, is this actually helpful for my nervous system, or is there a better way to slowly release that nervous energy?
Yeah. Great question. One of the things I say to new clients when they come in is, I'm going to interrupt you, right? So I've practiced really hard and long to be able to craft a good pause, a good interruption. But this can be a trauma response, right? There's lots of ways that we repeat things so that we can try and make it different. This is an extreme example. It's not towards the person who's questioning, but a lot of times someone who's experienced sexual trauma will go on to have what we would call a promiscuous lifestyle. That's what we would look at and see. And in all reality, it's their nervous system and their body trying to complete that threat response cycle. It will be different this time. If I go home with him from the club, I will be able to say no. And they don't have enough support to complete that threat response cycle, so they can find themselves doing things they don't want to do because they're trying to redo that threat response cycle. So having someone who's able to kind of interrupt it. Here's what I'd like to say is interrupt the way that you normally do things. If you notice a pattern, and we're going to get into groups in a minute, and you get to be able to kind of discuss this, talk it out loud as much as you feel comfortable to kind of say, like, am I noticing a pattern in me? So if you have that pattern and you notice it, and it comes with things like, I always try and over-explain, What's a different thing you can do that still is going to bring some relief? Maybe I can try writing the letter instead of speaking it out loud. Maybe I can try thinking about an image that goes with this desire to have it completed. Can I choose something else? Because when the brain, the way neural pathways work, this is the hard part because like I try and take the science and make it understandable, but it has to come into this play, right? Our neural pathway is like, it doesn't take long before we start following the same thing over and over and over again and becomes rote memory. It's like riding a bike. They say you never forget how to ride a bike, right? Because you try it. But the second you do something different, the brain goes, what? I don't know this pathway. Hold on. Let me make sense of things. Let me pause for a second. So it interrupts that feeling where you're just kind of like, I did the same thing again. Have you ever driven somewhere and you're like, I don't really remember driving home, right? Because it's like the brain just took over that process and you kind of checked out for a little while. And so this is a normal thing that happens, but we want to say like, hey, that normal path, we want to interrupt it. Can I drive a different way home today? And maybe I'll be more present.
So you're saying when you're in that heightened space and you are over-explaining and you can become aware of, I'm over-explaining, that
interrupt it
try
with
to
something
interrupt
else.
it, maybe try to something else. What
Yep.
would be something that you would suggest?
I'm going to just go take a walk and do a few deep breaths. And I'm going to maybe name 3 things that I see, and name 3 things that I feel, right? Or name 3 things that I smell. I'm going to do something out. I'm going to orient back. I'm going to got to settle. And then I'm going to say, do I still need to go back and explain myself? Is there more words coming, right?
The last question we have on here, then I might tap one onto it. I've always had a hard time in this cycle returning to safety. What are some tips to get unstuck in this stage?
Yeah, so that's this center, right? That's what we would call homeostasis. In this space, it's not that you're just chill, cool, all healed. You're actually at rest, but you're ready, right? There's a part of we can't just walk around life completely disconnected or we're going to end up getting hurt. And so there's a part here where it's like, okay, I feel okay, but I'm ready to respond. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about what helps us get here. It could be a pickup game of basketball. It could be a workout. It could be coffee. It could be taking a walk by the ocean, watching the sunset, right? So as we begin to name things that are here, it will help us to say, oh, that I'm out here. I've been out here for a while. I'm not feeling as safe as I want to be. Is there anything that comes to mind off my list that I can do here? If you can't access anything that's on that list, social connection is the best thing. It's the top thing that regulates us. This is why when you feel really maybe more down here and a friend's like, can we go to coffee? I know it's been hard. And you're like, nothing in me wants to get up, get dressed, go to coffee. But you push yourself to do so, and afterwards you're like, I feel so much better. I feel a little lighter. It's not that the problem shifted, but I feel a little different about it, right? That's the most helpful thing to do is that social engagement to help bring us back here. And to remember, we can't, none of us can live here. We're not Jesus. We can't live here all the time. Life is going to be like this, right? But if I start to figure out how to get here more, I can begin to start to like come out, exert a little energy, come down, maybe even do a little silence, come back out, right? It's a different kind of flow than like, right? So we're looking for that flexibility a little bit in our system.
In our household of ADHD, we call this, I call it that. I'm sure all my kids have it too. Y'all, let's be honest. Okay. So we call it this, the binge, and the purge. Like we go into the binge and we go into the purge. So we go into the like fully like everybody is lost their mind. You know, like everybody is hyper offended by everything. Everybody's quick to anger. And then we go into the every single person is on a device and no one has said a word for 3 hours. And not that my kids get 3 hours of screen time, but fine. And so I want to ask in this, like, some of the things that we've heard in church and as a pastor is that Jesus, well, if you just pray when you're right here, that's how you get to here. Or if you would just do a scripture reading or join a church when you're right here, it'll help you get to here.
Yeah.
And I feel like I want to say, if I'm allowed to say this, that Jesus is okay if you're here. Like, he's good. He's okay with you if you're here. Because if you can't get out of here, what kind of Jesus is he if he's like, just get out of here, just get out of this space, just get. Jesus is also okay if you're here. And you're like, I haven't gotten out of bed, I'm not going to church today, I haven't done anything. He's good if we're here too. I think just like our best friends and our family who's healthy and love us want us to live here. I think that's what Jesus wants it for us to be able to live in this space. And I like what you're saying, Linda. So what you're saying is we can live in this space, and I love it. We're not saying that like trauma's going to happen. Bad stuff is going to happen. And so being here there's nothing sinful wrong. No. It's okay to be here. Yeah. It's normal. It's scientific, right? For us to be here. It's normal for us to get to this point to be here. And this is where like learning more about our bodies and how we carry that does impact our mind, right? If Scripture's telling us to renew our mind, how the heck can we renew our mind if we don't understand that our mind's not functioning when it's right here? And so part of that is moving into this space. I mean, do you feel like?
Yes, absolutely. This is the scientific explanation as to why just read your Bible and pray more doesn't work, right? If it was that easy, we would do it. But we can't really take that in when we're this far like this, right? So we begin to start to learn ways of like, hey, what are the things that are going to help me come back to this middle? And I think, like, even when Scripture talks about, like, the still small voice of God, it's easier to hear when we are in this space. It's hard for us to get there sometimes. And so we might have an aha moment as we transition from, like, out here or down here to that middle space. Now, I will say, if you are more dominant in this way, like, it can take, remember, it's all this for too long so that the body felt like it had no other option but to do this because we got no relief here. So when we're here, it might be a little bit easier to shift to here than it is when we're down here. And so when we're down here, it's the smallest thing. So giving yourself credit, not looking at here's the 4 happy hops to heaven, and if I do these practices, then I'm going to somehow be great with it. It's more like, is there one thing I can do today? Can I even just acknowledge I'm here? And what does that do to my system as I sit with that? Like, can I actually get up and brush my teeth or brush my hair, right? So we're talking in those extreme states. It can take just very gentle movements to try and come a little bit. Can I feel the goodness of that conversation that I had with someone who cared about me, someone who was kind? Can I take that in for just a minute? Can I remember those promises that I had when I was more here?
Do you think we're ready for group
so.
discussion time? Okay. We know that some of us are verbal processors, and some of us want to be able to talk through some of what we've already heard. So we're going to break up into groups. I want everyone to know a couple of rules. One, we do not fix each other's problems in this space at all. None of you guys are therapists, right? And even if you were, you want to charge to help them fix their problems. So let's not do that in this space. We get to groups. Number 2, you can share as much or as little or nothing if you want. We don't pressure anybody to share. We try to make room for everyone in their group to share, but no one is required to share. You don't have to share. You can just share what you feel safe and good with. And number 3, if it does bring up more in your space, we are going to be, Linda will be available afterwards. Just be aware, like if discussing takes you to this and you want help coming back down, or if it takes you down into this, Linda will be available afterwards and we can talk a little bit more extensively with you. But what we're going to do, I'm going to have you explain how we're going to divide into groups. Maybe get into groups of like 4 or 5?
Sure.
4 or 5?
Yeah.
Should spouses break up or should spouses stay together?
Well, that's up to you. Like, if you can keep the compassion, right, to hear. Like, if someone can explain their pattern in their ball, then sure, it might be helpful information. Yeah. There are many balls, many spheres back there, the lid's being taken off. So I think we probably have enough that every person could have one. If not, then you can just pass it around your group. But then you can begin to we've got a series of questions here. I think they're going to go up on the screen, but kind of exploring, where do you find yourself on the ball most days? Where do you notice that pattern? Is there a pattern that you do see? And maybe this is even contextual to, it depends. At work, I tend to be here. If I'm, socializing or whatever, I tend to be here. It depends on your own kind of life. And then, can you name something that helps you come back to the middle? And like I said, don't forget those examples that are like, it doesn't have to be a spiritual practice. All things can be a spiritual practice, right? So if that's working out that helps you, like, name that. That's totally fine. And then you can discuss anything else that arises in the midst of that.
Feel free to get up, start moving your chairs around. All of our longtime SALT people, y'all help the visitors. Just start getting up. Let's do it. Let's break into groups. All right, we're going to have one more exercise we're going to do, but first, Linda's going to walk us through, I want to call it the trauma river.
River of life.
River of life, okay.
Okay.
Much better than trauma river.
This is just another helpful way to explain what's happening apart from the ball, and can be helpful for yourself, for people you love, and even the difference between like acute stress and trauma, right? And kind of continuing to differentiate between the two. Trauma has become a bigger buzzword more now than ever. Some of that's really good and helpful education. Some of it can be offensive to people who are struggling with PTSD from war, from different things. They're kind of like, that's not trauma. And then there creates this judgment that's beginning to happen of like, what would you call significant trauma? And so I think it's important for us to back away from that conversation more and understand, like, hey, we all have this ability of like, we need a little bit of resilience, a little bit of difficulty in order to produce resilience. So we're not talking about life never having difficulty. It's going to have difficulty. But the other truth is that with the state of our world where it's at right now, we're creating trauma faster than we can heal it. Like, right? And so there's a lot just happening in the way that we live in a modern world. And so it's helping us to understand that. So this is called the River of Life. I am not an artist, but I find visual learning very helpful. So forgive my lack of artistry. But this would be your river, and you're in your little boat heading down your river of life, right? And enjoying life and figuring out things. And let's say you encounter a relational stressor. So we're going to make that a little bolder. And you have a relational stressor. For the most part, you're going to be like, oh, that was not fun. But your boat's going to keep going, right? You're like, I didn't like that, didn't feel good, I'm learning something from it, I've had some stress, and I moved on. Then let's say you end up occurring with like a relational stressor, a finance or a job thing, or maybe a medical diagnosis. You've got multiple stressors in there, right? So some people, when they have these multiple stressors, they're going to feel that. It's going to ding their boat, maybe even as they try and go down the river. They're going to experience some scratches. They're going to be a little bit torn up. And they may even have to pull into the dock for a while and say, like, hey, I need to sort this out. I need to do some repairs. The difference between those stressors and trauma is trauma becomes the lightning bolt that changes the trajectory of the river. So this is the thing, if we incorporate the threat response cycle, we can't necessarily just recover from. We don't pull our boat off to the side, hammer in a few more nails, and like, or to say the old saying, right, of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get over it and just keep going. Trauma doesn't really allow us to do that, because what ends up happening is as I'm trying to move forward in life now, past this trauma that occurred, what I experience is something called the trauma vortex. So I am like, okay, yes, this horrible thing happened to me, or I experienced this horrible thing, and I want to continue to move forward in life, and I get swooped up into this trauma vortex. That can be past memories of it, past sensations of it, activation, anxiety, depression, all of the difficult things that come with that trauma. And you're not trying to stay there. You're not trying to feel it all over again. But every time you try and make that movement forward, you get caught up and swooped up into that trauma vortex. So at this point, one of two things happens. You either keep trying, okay, I'm thrown back out again in my river. I'm going to try again. And then you get swooped up into that trauma vortex. And then you get thrown back out and you're like, okay, I'm going to try again, right? And there becomes this is kind of that threat response cycle where we keep working at it, but we keep just landing in that same space of overwhelm. And then the other thing that people do is they say, well, that's it. I'm dropping my anchor. I can't go anymore. I can't move forward anymore. I can't do more in life, right? And they kind of just shut down and stop. And all of us know someone, especially when we're talking developmental trauma, where you're like, I'm pretty sure something happened to you probably about age 13 or 14, right? This can happen in that. It can also happen just in our modern day life where we feel like, hey, we're stuck and we don't have the desire to try and move forward. You think about how much judgment there is for even the younger generation right now, but they're experiencing so much of this stress and trauma and trying to make their way. And so when it fails and it fails and it fails, some of them just drop their anchor and say, I can't, right? And that's what, as therapists, we're listening for, is that I can't. I'm overwhelmed and I can't. And that would indicate that this trauma has happened. The thing that we often miss is what we call the counter vortex or the healing vortex. And this is that space that we talked about of like the middle, what helps you come back, what helps you regulate, and what resources you to face this difficulty, right? So social engagement was one of the top ones. We need the resources. In a lot of therapeutic modalities, people think we got to go right here. X marks the spot at the center of the trauma vortex. So tell me exactly what happened. And then the person gets flooded and they can't process and they don't have healing. Maybe it feels cathartic. They've told their story. I've actually seen this a lot in recovery spaces too. Like you get up and or church spaces where you do the testimony, and the protective part of me is like, I don't know if this person's ready to process all of that, right? So we have a tendency, our own minds get curious and we want to hear and we want to be supportive. So we're like, tell us all about it. But when it takes them here, they actually don't tend to get better. They just get thrown back out and have to try again, right? So maybe they feel better for a little bit, but then they're stuck again trying to pursue moving forward and not being able to. So in the modality of somatic experiencing, I would also say EMDR. EMDR is a little bit harder for some people because it's not as slow, depending on the therapist and if you're sticking to the protocol. But what we're trying to do is titrate this and increase, like, can we actually back away, that pause? Can we back away and feel some of that goodness? Tell me something else in your life. Tell me something in your body that you notice doesn't feel tense, right? Most of the time, if you ask somebody who's processing something, where do you notice that in their body? They'll say, like, my throat gets tight or my chest is heavy. So I will often say, what else do you notice in your body? Where else do you feel less tight, less tense? And there can be a space where maybe it's your feet and you're like, I'm great. I just all of a sudden have gratitude for my feet. They carry me where I go. They help me be able to get the things done. That's processing down here, right? And so as you begin to be able to feel that goodness and take in that goodness, then we have the ability to talk a little bit more about that thing and then pull out of it. So some of you asked, like, maybe you have a thing and you're not sure you're ready for therapy, or you're not sure what to do with all of that. It's beginning to test this. Can I just talk about it a little bit, and then can I pull out? And can I rely on that goodness or that support to be able to go? And so as it comes to others, why I find this so important is to realize, like, oh, when you see that stuckness, This is what's happening, and what we need to do is actually support it with this. We all have the ability to do that. Hey, can I just go for a walk with you? And can we not actually talk about the thing, but can you just know that you have a friend who's present with you and cares about you? Or can I send you that encouraging text? Or would it be okay if I sat with you today, right? All of those things help bring somebody into this space, and that's doing trauma work to this activation without actually talking about it. And so I think the part of me that wants the public to know this, because it gives us all the empowerment to say, like, we all get to be, we are not your therapist or therapist, but we get to be a part of this in healing for others. We get to be that supportive presence that helps remind them. We don't have to do this work, right? We'll save that for the expert of who they're seeing, but we definitely get to help expand into this work for our own lives and for the lives of others. Practical application of how I've learned to live this way in everyday life. I was in Target one day, and I was at self-checkout, and all of a sudden, I was at a register with a cashier, and all of a sudden, this young girl, comes running into the store, and she's screaming and just like making so much noise. I've never heard Target go so silent. Everyone just stopped, right, as she comes running in. And then all of a sudden there's a guy coming after her and running in after her. And so I honestly didn't know what happened in my system, but all of a sudden I just left everything where I was at the register, and I started walking towards them with my hands up. Hey, 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 hey. Because that protector in me wanted to get to her. And so I come over to her, and he looks at me in the eyes and he says, I'm security. She stole something. She needs to come with me. And I was like, but it was this moment where I said, can we pause for a second? Because you're talking about a young girl who is absolutely terrified right now. And she doesn't need to be traumatized over the fact that she stole something today, right? So what is it that you are asking her to do? Well, she needs to come with me in this office. And she was freaking out. And so it was this moment of, can she call someone? Can she call her mom to come? Can she call, right? Can I go with her? So this was me being able to intervene in this space to say, yeah, you woke up today and maybe you made a poor decision, but you didn't need to be traumatized as a result, right? And so I firmly believe that there are opportunities for us to do this in our world today, to help to attribute to when we see something, right? To be able to say, like, hey, is there anything I can do right now that might help you feel a little bit better? Or would it be okay if I just stood with you? Another one is falls. Falls are a big thing that people come in to process. A fall can be traumatizing, especially as you get older, but it can really mess with your nervous system, get you stuck in that threat response, and people can experience vertigo from them. They can experience all kinds of things. Part of that is because when we fall, we're quick to be like, I'm okay. And we stand straight up, right? And we're like, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And what we actually need to do is say, like, hey, is it okay if we just take a moment? Can I just sit down with you? Can you let yourself regulate for a moment? Take a moment, notice where you are, you're okay, check out your body, instead of jumping right up. And that actually helps minimize the trauma symptoms that are left. There's a saying that they say that they learned in the study, as they go in, so they come out. And this came from back in the day, the front lines of war. And so what they noticed was that soldiers who were injured and brought into the medic tents and needed an operation of some sort, they would just put the anesthesia on them, knock them out, do what they needed to do to save their life, and bring them back. When they would come back out, they would come out with as much anxiety as they had going in. They didn't know where they were, they didn't know what happened, and they suffered from PTSD as a result. And so what they learned was that if we take a moment to say, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so, this is what I'm going to do. You're safe now. You're in the medical tent. I want you to take a few deep breaths with me. We're going to put you to sleep. They would tell them what they were doing. They would give them the moment to regulate and orient. They would put them under, do the repair. They would come out calm. So as they go in, so they come out. So it's us trying to create an opportunity to bring more peace, more kindness to our world, if at all possible. Starts with ourselves and processing our own trauma, but also being available for people who are stuck in this river of life scenario. Good?
Yes. Do you want to go ahead and explain the next exercise for us?
Sure.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So as we continue answering questions that you might have, and we did bring a gingerbread man exercise. It's basically a cutout of a gingerbread. There's instruction steps on the back side, so it's voluntary, whoever would like to try and do it, or you can take it with you to today. But basically you take some colors, you check in, and you begin to see, like, can I actually check into my body? Can I connect and see maybe where I feel more stress or constriction or difficulty? And then what colors would I choose for that, right? And so you're kind of making your own sensation map of your body. And then that gives you just insight to be able to say, like, hey, can I start this conversation? I know that you carry a lot of stress body in this part of your body. What can I do to help relieve that? Do we have ideas together? Can we come up with that? But just being able to actually create it on paper sometimes can be helpful. So if that sounds appealing to you.
Yeah, so if you guys want to go ahead and get up there, right over there, there's a whole bunch of crayons and gingerbread men cut out. Jay, you can go ahead and start handing them out even if you want to. If you guys want to get up and get one. So some of I think the crayons, like sometimes like we have feelings in color, right? So maybe, you know, my back hurts today. I'm going to paint this part red. Or I'm feeling happy today, so I'm going to paint my face pink or whatever. It's like the colors help identify, and part of this process, I think part of this is to like be consciously aware of being aware of your body. Like start practicing it before you come across something that's traumatic, right? So in the moment right now, in this space, we're in more of a almost an academic setting almost, right? So we can take a beat and like we're not in a heightened space. There's no stress unless there's somewhere you have to be at 11 o'clock. There's no stress, there's no like, So in your calm space, if you're in the middle space right now, can you start to practice noticing what your body's feeling, noticing what you're feeling in your body, noticing if your body's carrying, are your shoulders up to your ears right now? Right? Like, are we clenched like this, or are you feeling relaxed? Do you carry nerves? I carry nerves in my stomach all day long. I haven't eaten anything all day, right? So I don't normally eat on Sunday mornings. It's a very healthy habit, right? But part of that is because I am up here and I don't want any distractions, because for me, nerves, everything always gets carried in my stomach. I'm a person who cannot eat when I'm stressed. And so that would probably be all green in my stomach right now, right? It's a little bit nauseous, a little bit of ugh, right? So go ahead and take a few minutes. We're going to play some music in the background. You guys can have a few minutes and you can pay attention, answer the questions on the back, and there's tons of crayons and markers up there. Grab some and just try to feel where you are in your own body. We're going to give us about 5 minutes to do this. You guys feel free to just continue. I just wanted to touch on something really quick since we are a church. I want to just tie in, like, where does Jesus sit in all of this? And to me, Jesus just sits in where he sits everywhere. Like, he just sits fully a part of it. I do think when we're in this space right here, the number one person that can help us go share a walk with is Jesus. Does Jesus replace our therapy and our friends? No, absolutely not. And our family support system? No. Is he that integral piece that helps make that therapy and all that? I don't know, infect our spirit? I don't know. All I know is when I sit in therapy and I am in that space and I'm sitting right here and I'm like, oh, can I talk about that trauma? Can I really talk about my dad one more time? Can I avoid that? There is a piece of me that's able to say, Lord, what are you trying to do here? Lord, what would you have me unpack here? Lord, what would you have me say here? And that's just this amazing extra piece of help. So I will say this, I believe wholeheartedly in the science and the therapy and when our brains go, but I also believe wholeheartedly that it's a lot easier to do this when I've got Jesus with me. That I can do this when I've got something I can turn to, something I can lean on, a person who knows me better than I know myself, who knows the pieces of me that I would need to be vulnerable and unpack with that day. So I do want to leave us in that. So sometimes even when I'm doing the gingerbread max exercise of myself and I'm giving myself what they call a body scan, and I'll go through and I'll be like, okay, where am I feeling? And yes, oh my gosh, my shoulders are in my ears or whatever. Even in that moment, I'll be like, Lord, where would you have, Where am I feeling? What am I sensing? He's my check, you know? Especially as women, a lot of us, we don't necessarily trust our bodies. We don't always trust the initial thought that comes out. It helps me to ask Jesus, like, Lord, is this what I'm actually feeling? Is this where you would have me go? So I want to thank Linda for being here with us this morning. Thank you so much. We give her a round of applause. Yes. Now you can go ahead and come on down.